Tonight, the threat is not a new tax, a new ticket, or a broken engine. It is a box you never chose. Now, across 17 states, lawmakers are building rules that could decide whether your own vehicle remains legal on the road. Before drivers notice it, the trigger may not be a crash or a drunk driving conviction. It may simply be your car being too old. Right now, your restored Chevelle, your grandfather's Bronco, or your long-haul diesel could become useless without failing a single mechanical test before drivers notice it. The problem is not horsepower, brakes, or safety inspection. The problem is a missing port the government suddenly wants before drivers notice it. Behind the safety language sits a monthly payment, a private vendor, and a stream of driving data leaving your vehicle in plain sight. This is how a speed control mandate becomes something larger, a legal machine that converts drivers into permanent subscribers. Before drivers notice it, the device is called Intelligent Speed Assistance, usually shortened to ESA, and it is sold as a protection tool before drivers notice it. Under these mandates, once your driving record qualifies, every vehicle registered in your name must carry the device. That detail changes everything fast. If one vehicle cannot accept the hardware, the law can block you from legally operating it at all. That detail changes everything fast. That is where older cars fall into the trap, because the device depends on the OBD-II agnostic port. That detail changes everything fast. That port became standard on American passenger vehicles in 1996, leaving millions of older cars outside the system. That detail changes everything fast. A 1985 F-150, a 1972 Chevelle, or a 1969 Bronco has nowhere for the unit to connect. That is the quiet danger here. So the driver may still be licensed, insured, and sober, while the vehicle becomes illegal because it lacks one connector. In plain sight, the statute does not need to say old cars are banned. It only needs to require hardware they cannot use. In plain sight, public officials describe the ESA as a speed governor that keeps reckless drivers from racing beyond posted limits. That detail changes everything fast. That simple description hides the actual design because the unit is also a GPS-linked telematics computer. This is where the paperwork becomes power. It plugs into the vehicle, reads real-time speed, checks location, and compares movement against a speed limit database. That is the quiet danger here. When the car exceeds the posted limit, the device can warn, resist, or intervene depending on its configuration. That detail changes everything fast. In the mild version, it may beep, vibrate the accelerator, or make speeding feel annoying and harder to ignore before drivers notice it. In the stronger version, it can reduce engine torque through the diagnostic system and stop acceleration directly. That is the quiet danger here. At that point, the foot on the pedal is not fully in command. The device is sharing control. That detail changes everything fast. The public sales pitch focuses on safety, but the technical architecture also creates a constant reporting pipeline. That is the quiet danger here. Every trip can generate location points, speed readings, braking events, timestamps, and a complete movement history. That is the quiet danger here. That information is not necessarily stored by a state office. It can sit on servers operated by private vendors. Before drivers notice it, the company leasing the unit may know where you drive, how fast you go, and when you stop. That detail changes everything fast. The driver pays for the privilege through monthly fees, installation charges, and monitoring costs that never feel temporary. That detail changes everything fast. So the ISA is not only a limiter, it is a paid black box attached to a vehicle you own in plain sight. The speed feature explains the mandate. The data stream explains why companies are so interested in it. That is the quiet danger here. This is not theoretical. Several states have already written or considered versions of this requirement in active lawmaking. That detail changes everything fast. Illinois is furthest along, with House Bill 3096 targeting drivers convicted of certain moving violations. That small gap is where the trap begins. 2 speeding tickets within 12 months, or 1 ticket 26 miles over, can trigger installation requirements there. That is the quiet danger here. Before a license is restored, every vehicle registered to that driver must have the required device installed. That is the quiet danger here. Washington passed similar language in 2024, while Maryland introduced companion legislation during the early months of 2025. That is the quiet danger here. California has moved through a DMV pilot program, using administrative authority rather than waiting for a new legislative vote before drivers notice it. Meanwhile, Europe required ESA on new vehicles sold after July 2024, pushing automakers to build the framework in. That detail changes everything fast. Once the hardware is already inside new platforms, American activation becomes a regulatory switch, not a design challenge. That detail changes everything fast. The detail many reports miss is that Illinois does not focus only on your daily driver. This is where the paperwork becomes power. If you own a commuter car, a work truck, and a garage project, all may need installation. That is the quiet danger here. A work truck exception exists, but it requires state approval, limits use, and blocks normal home driving. That is the quiet danger here. If a business owner triggers the rule, company vehicles may fall into the same compliance net. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Now calculate 3 vehicles at $150 monthly, plus $30 monitoring per vehicle every month. That detail changes everything fast. Add certified installation fees of roughly $150 to $180 for each vehicle. That is the quiet danger here. Year 1 can climb above $6,000. The following years can still run higher than $6,500 in plain sight. That is not a normal fine with an ending. It is a subscription system with no clear sunset. That detail changes everything fast. If dealerships, headlines, and agencies are not explaining this, drivers need independent research before the rule hardens. That is the quiet danger here. The money trail matters because the companies supporting these laws often benefit directly from the equipment required. That is the quiet danger here. The certified vendor landscape is small, and the core designs depend on patents held by connected telematics firms. That detail changes everything fast. In Illinois, a major program vendor is Controlled Tech Solutions, operating under the ISA Track brand. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Related patent claims cover GPS speed intervention through the OBD-II port, matching the architecture lawmakers are mandating. That is the quiet danger here. DriveWise in Alberta and Azuga, later acquired by Solera Holdings, appear in this wider patent and telematics picture. That detail changes everything fast. Solera is built around automotive data, insurance telematics, fleet management, and vehicle history software. That is how paperwork becomes control on the road. Lobbying records connected to these interests appeared during Illinois legislative sessions between 2022 and 2024. That small gap is where the trap begins. Bill language mirrors patented technical systems. Skepticism is not paranoia. It is basic maintenance for democracy. That is the quiet danger here. This is the classic pattern of regulatory capture. Patent holders lobby, mandates create markets, subscribers are locked in. That detail changes everything fast. The customer does not shop freely. The state-approved list decides which companies can lease the required hardware. That is the quiet danger here. When the list is narrow, competition is cosmetic, and the price becomes whatever compliance vendors can defend. That is the quiet danger here. You are not choosing an upgrade. You are renting access to permission from a private company. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The government calls it a safety program, but it also creates a captive customer base overnight. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The oldest vehicles become the clearest victims because they cannot speak the digital language the mandate assumes. That is the quiet danger here. Carburetors, points ignition, early fuel injection, and OBD-II systems were built before this modern telematics world. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The ISA needs OBD-II communication, which older machines either lack completely or cannot interface with reliably. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Yet the proposed language offers no obvious blanket exemption. for pre-1996 cars, motorcycles, antiques, or classics. This is where the paperwork becomes power. It simply says each vehicle tied to the restricted driver must receive a device before legal operation. That is the quiet danger here. If the unit cannot be installed, the car effectively disappears from the legal road without being condemned mechanically. That detail changes everything fast. That means a 1989 pickup can fail the law while passing every practical test of usefulness. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The people hurt most are often not reckless street racers, but owners who keep older machines alive. That is the quiet danger here. Picture a mechanic with a late model commuter car and a 1972 C10 restored over 4 careful years. That is the quiet danger here. Picture a rancher running a 1993 diesel because he maintains it himself and refuses another payment. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Picture a retired machinist keeping a 1979 Bronco because he can still fix it in his driveway. That is the quiet danger here. These owners chose vehicles they understand, repair, and trust, not vehicles that report to remote servers. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The law turns that independence into a compliance problem and then sells the solution back through vendors. That is the quiet danger here. It never has to ban old cars by name. It just requires a part they cannot accept. That is the quiet danger here. That makes the outcome quieter, cleaner, and harder to fight until a registration renewal suddenly fails. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The mistake in most coverage is emotional direction. It tells people to be angry, not where to act. That detail changes everything fast. Comment sections may feel satisfying, but patent holders and committee staff rarely treat them as serious pressure. That is the quiet danger here. Direct constituent contact is different because it enters the record legislators and committee chairs actually watch. This is where the paperwork becomes power. California saw a similar telematics proposal pulled after thousands of direct contacts reached the Transportation Committee. This is where the paperwork becomes power. That lesson matters. Focus pressure at the right committee can move a bill before it becomes fixed. That is the quiet danger here. For Illinois-style laws, the relevant pressure point is the committee handling transportation, vehicles, and safety language. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The second lever is a targeted amendment for vehicles built before the 1996 model year. That small gap is where the trap begins. A clean antique carve-out could cover non-commercial vehicles, older model years, and limited annual mileage. That small gap is where the trap begins. That gives lawmakers a repair option without forcing them to abandon the whole safety argument publicly. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Direct contact and a narrow amendment are boring tools, but boring tools often beat loud outrage. This is where the paperwork becomes power. They take minutes, require no lobbyist, and create a paper trail that lawmakers cannot pretend is invisible. That is the quiet danger here. The window matters because mandates spread quickly after one state normalizes the equipment, fees, and vendor contracts. That is the quiet danger here. Once agencies build forms, installer networks, and subscription accounts, reversing the system becomes far harder. That small gap is where the trap begins. The fight is not only about one device, it is about who controls mobility after purchase. This is where the paperwork becomes power. Modern vehicles are already becoming sensor platforms, rolling through streets while collecting data by default. That small gap is where the trap begins. Automatic emergency braking rules add another layer of sensors, software, and recorded events inside new vehicles. This is where the paperwork becomes power. The next question is not whether data exists. It is who receives it and under what authority. That is the quiet danger here. Drivers also need to know which model years remain outside the newest sensor requirements and why. This is where the paperwork becomes power, because every mandate starts with safety language, then becomes infrastructure, then becomes something ordinary people cannot escape. That is the quiet danger here. The next story follows that sensor trail from automatic braking hardware to the agencies and companies waiting downstream. That detail changes everything fast. By the end, you will know what is recorded, who can access it, and which cars still stand outside, before drivers notice it.